Those are great moments where you're really tired of any type of experience. Those phases, if you have them. And sometimes they can occur when you're suffering, no matter where you look or what you do. Then it's more pronounced. Sounds like, well, if I can't fix this, if I can't change my state right now, then I'm really tired of all kinds of experience. I'm tired of experience itself, like any experience. So therefore, experience itself. And then something again can open up because you're playing with that threshold where just like you can ignore an aspect of your experience, you can also ignore, doesn't mean it's not registered on some level, but you can ignore what is registered, meaning not indulge anything and stay really stationary, for lack of a better word, really undistracted, unfold. And then it's kind of like you're stepping into a stable nothingness. But again, if you sort of stay with that, it's like a new dimension that is different can begin to sort of knock on your back door and open up the sense of indescribable, vast reality, yet not an experience. And there's kind of three sort of nothingnesses, unless you want to call the absolute nothingness, which I typically don't. But there's just the concept of nothingness, the thought of nothingness, just the idea of a blankness, which can lead into sort of a blankness state, still within the mind. But it's basically just a concept in the mind. It's a thought form. Then there's the causal body nothingness, which can also be interpreted as a nothingness, because there's no, beyond the subtle body, beyond the mind, beyond the senses, beyond the energies, the pranas and all that, there is unfamiliar territory, because it doesn't have a form in that sense. It doesn't have it doesn't have an object. There's no objects as we know it, except for the causal body itself, which we're not familiar with being conscious of. So when we're sort of at the threshold of mind to no mind, or mind or subtle body, mental body to causal body, that is typically experienced as a nothingness as well, as just sort of a state of ignorance or darkness. Not negative darkness, but just the absence of objects, the absence of highlights. And then there's sort of a nothingness that is right, sort of when you're playing with the threshold of pure being or pure consciousness or pure awareness. I'm using these synonymously right now, or God. When you're kind of at that threshold and you're starting to look and inquire beyond all experiencing, then when you're turning your back on awareness, all forms of consciousness, even the sense of being, then it is again like initially, because it's unfamiliar territory, so initially it's like this nothingness, but it has a bit of a weird sort of magnetic pull to it, or pressure, depending how you interpret it. But it's kind of like a nothingness. It's kind of like the aura in between awareness and absolute reality. It's kind of like the gateway, if you will, or the sort of in-between phase where kind of like a twilight almost. So initially, typically what we intuit and sense when we begin to gaze in a clear moment, in a lucid moment, when we gaze beyond or inquire beyond consciousness, initially, typically before there is sort of a potential full-blown realization of absolute reality, being absolute reality, becoming absolute reality, there's this sense, this filter of a sort of nothingness also. So there's the concept, there's the causal body, which can be interpreted as nothingness. And then there is right at the threshold between awareness and the absolute reality. Before reality is really realized, before the lights, in a sense, go on. There's no lights, but before awareness really is absorbed into absolute infinity, there is this sort of yet another nothingness threshold, at least in my experience, I have found. That's why I'm always a little skeptical when people call the absolute nothingness. Maybe they've had sort of a glimpse or they've played at that threshold, but it can be causal body. In the most uneducated cases or not self-aware cases, it can even be just the concept of a blank state of mind. Like the concept of nothingness, when you meditate on that, eventually it will take you into the causal body if there's enough concentration on the concept. But initially it's just like, oh yeah, I'm not having any thoughts. or a blank nothing state of mind. And if people are sort of advanced, then they can come to the conclusion that they've transcended awareness and that they've really glimpsed the other side, but then typically they call it nothingness. Again, like when you sort of go through that threshold, like go through it, it is a little bit like going through a portal or a black hole, where you really exit all your senses and all your conventional ways of experiencing. Well, you're exiting all of experiencing. But then it is, I mean, it's difficult to metaphysically be accurate in describing this. But how you could picture it is as if you are the shuttle, your consciousness is the shuttle, and it's sort of taking that black hole, and it migrates to the other side, if you will. It migrates, it really transcends the whole sphere of consciousness, but it maintains itself. It doesn't go unconscious. It doesn't turn to nothing. It is like nothing because it's not a thing, but it is the infinite reality. It's like absolute. You realize like, ooh, this is absolute. You feel, you know, I don't know. It's so hard to describe, right? But because we're using senses and concepts that we're used to, but that's what I call, again, the exclusive realization of the absolute. Exclusive meaning at the exclusion of everything else. And therefore it is only the reality, but it is experiencing itself. It's kind of like the pure mirror of awareness. Instead of being turned towards the whole realm of form and consciousness and creation, it turns the other way, and it now illuminates the absolute to itself. You could say it in that way. Although the absolute itself is free of that mirror, of that awareness. So it's like the lights go off on everything, and they go on something else that you've never known before. You have, but to the memory of you, it's a totally new, like unspeakable dimension of being, for lack of a better word.